A few years ago, I want to say 2010 or thereabouts, but I'm not exactly sure. I was taking evening classes at a local community college. It being winter and the class starting at 7 meant it was dark by the time I left the house. Across from our house is a vacant lot and an empty field, with a pair of radio or cell towers in the distance. We're also almost directly on a flight path from the local airport, and we do get the occasional military helicopter flyover, courtesy of the nearby Marine base. Point being, I know what all these things look and sound like, even at night. So I was somewhat confused by the sight one night of a steady white light above the cell towers. It wasn't moving or blinking and too bright to be a star. I watched it for maybe a half a minute and then shrugged and got in my car. Probably a logical explanation, and I had places to be. So a few minutes later, as I'm driving through the neighborhood, I see the light again, closer this time. What's more, it seems to be moving in my direction. I'm curious enough as to what it is that I put the car in park and get out for a look. It's hard to judge size, as it's a black object against a black background, maybe bus-sized if it was right above treetop level, far, far larger if it was any higher. There are these bright, steady white lights laid out in a triangular pattern on each corner of it. As I watch, it drifts. That's the first word that came to my mind, and still, I think that's the best way to describe it. Slow and steady across the road in front of my car. Smooth, unhurried, at a walking pace. There's no noise, no sound of an engine or disturbing the trees as it flies over. The object is completely silent. That is what really got me about it. I mean, my brain could still process what I was seeing, but the sheer fact that something that big could be that quiet was what threw me off. It takes about 30 seconds to drift across the road and disappear behind the trees. That's the last I saw of it. About 5 or 6 years ago, my boyfriend and I were hanging out with 2 acquaintances. One had several experiences with greys and other explainable stuff. I'll refer to him as EA. The other guy was curious but hasn't had any. My boyfriend had experiences too, one which he shared with EA. As for myself, I've heard stories not just from them but growing up. So this particular night, it's probably around 12:30 a.m. We were out driving around Pasadena, California, and my boyfriend mentions going to a place nearby that he and the EA knew about. The EA hesitates but agrees because he knew it was on a private property. We park and have to walk up a really dark, curvy driveway, which is not even close to being safe because it's dirt and very narrow and it goes up a hillside. If you drive up carelessly, you can literally roll your car down the ravine. Anyway, we make it to the top of the hill. Our intention was just to find a place to sit and wait for something to happen. This particular area is known by a few people for occurrences. There's a house on the bluff overlooking the city. Behind the house, it drops onto a field. We didn't want to disturb anyone, so we walked down along a path that runs along the field out of sight of the house, and walked to the other side of the field and up some stairs. We are now on the opposite side of the house. There's a pool area that has a tall wooden fence around it. The gate is unlocked, so we go in. The pool is empty and there's junk all over. Clearly it hasn't been used in years, so we find some old chairs and sit and wait. This side looks over onto the forest, but if you go to the far left, you can see the city lights in the distance. Looking across the forest is where we start to see a strange light coming out just above the tree line. It slowly moved back and forth, going down into the trees and coming up again. As this is happening, the light would change color. It went from a bright white light to a blue, and then it would change to a dim red color. It just continued to do this. It was so weird. We sat for a little longer, and I remember getting a feeling like we were being watched. Of course, I was a little paranoid because we were in a place that we shouldn't have been in the first place. There was a massive tree that sat on the bluff like 50 feet from the house, at the far end of the pool. It caught my eye because it did the oddest thing, almost like something flew into the tree. It's kind of hard to explain, like it was alive. I don't know. Just the way it was swaying, it was almost like a dance. I'd never seen a large tree move like that. Almost like it had intention. I know I saw it, but I didn't talk at all. None of us did. We just sat in silence and continued to observe our surroundings. I just couldn't stop looking at that tree. It was a calm night, the sky was clear, no sign of any storm. Nothing else was being blown around. It was just that tree that kept me intrigued. After a while, we decided it was time to leave. The light in the distance stopped appearing. We walked in silence all the way back to the car, and that's when we started talking about what we saw. Then the EA says, "So, how about that tree?" We all saw it, but didn't have any explanation for anything that night. I would like to go back there again, but I don't think it's a good idea. I work a pretty easygoing office job, and I consistently listen to podcasts while I do my work. That being said, I've always had an interest in the paranormal and the unexplained, so that's typically what I listen to. I was listening to an interview by Astonishing Legends with Terry Lovelace about the things he encountered and what he experienced from a camping trip in the Devil's Den back in the 70s. To sum it up, he touched on what happened to him, and a couple of things stood out to me. It reminded me of something that happened to me as a kid that I always chalked up to sleep paralysis, but now it has me second-guessing myself. I must have been in about 3rd or 4th grade. At the time, we lived kind of on the edge of a bunch of farmland and woods. Our backyard opened up to our neighbors, whom owned acres upon acres of land, and to the left of that was just endless farmland and forest. We lived a few miles away from a really popular and huge dairy farm, but we were also a mile or two out from a main road that leads into town. I guess the point I'm getting at is we were kind of secluded, but not completely isolated. The Midwest is like that at times, I guess. My room at the time was in the basement, and the stairs that led down to it was right in front of our back door. I slept with my bed right in front of my bedroom door as well. It was summer break, and after finally deciding I was tired, I went to lay down in my bed. My memory goes in and out at that point, and there's missing spots in between because I think as soon as I laid down, I just blacked right out. I remember I just woke up right after passing out, and I'm not sure how much time passed between these 2 points in time, but I immediately looked at the foot of my bed, and the door to my room was wide open, and there's this blinding light outside my room. I remember seeing this figure right in the doorway to my room. I couldn't make out any distinct features because of the light coming from behind it. All I got was an outline and the shape of how it looked. It must have been not that much shorter than me, as I was a kid at the time, probably around 4 feet, I think. It had a huge bulbous head and a tiny body. In retrospect, it was shaped like a gray, but I don't know if that's a cliche to say. I just remember this utmost primal sense of fear, and I couldn't move. I've never experienced that level of horror before, and I haven't felt that feeling since. I was laying on my back in my bed, and all I could do was stare at it. I was trying to scream, but nothing could come out of my lungs, and I couldn't get up to run out or anything. I was completely paralyzed to that spot. I blacked out again, came to, and it was closer, right at the end of my bed. At that point, I tried screaming again, still nothing would come out, and yet again I blacked out. I came to that morning at the opposite side of my room, flopped across this little couch I had. It's hard to explain it too because there's nothing in between these points of time, it's just a blank spot. I tried to explain it to my mom, but it was just chalked up to sleepwalking and a nightmare because I stayed up too late or something to that effect. For a while after that, I was horrified to watch any form of alien movie, or even just anything in TV that resembled what that thing was shaped like. I would have a full-blown panic attack and start to hyperventilate. I've gotten past that, and that doesn't really get to me anymore. However, I still to this day cannot sleep with my bed in front of my door, or with my door open. I don't even like sleeping near the door. I need to be as far away from it as possible. Even during the day, if I'm doing something in a room, I need to have the door closed. Having it open just sends this massive feeling of discomfort and anxiety. I can't do it. I've experienced weird things all throughout my life, but after a while, when with growing up, I just always chalked it up to sleep paralysis. But I'm not so sure anymore. This happened to me back in 2013. I was 18 at the time. I was a healthy, normal woman by all accounts, and lived in a suburb of South Florida. Just at that juncture in my life, I was moving up to North UF, which is in Gainesville. Aside from the university, it's a very boring town, mostly nothing up there. I had noticed that before moving there, and during my time there once a month, always on the same night, I think the first Sunday of every month, I wouldn't be able to sleep. Without fail, I couldn't sleep and I would toss and turn all night. Sometimes after those nights, I would wake up with something strange in my body. Once on my lower spine, right on the cord, I woke up with a large red bump, perfectly centered. It wasn't itchy like a bug bite and it wasn't unlike a pimple. Another time, I woke up with a scar across my lower abdomen. It was long and unlike a scratch. It was brown, like a cauterized scar, but it left my body within a day or two like a scratch might have. One such Sunday, my boyfriend happened to be spending the night. It was my parents' rule that he would sleep in a separate bedroom, but before he went off to his room, he laid next to me in my bed for a little while and we talked. He was saying something when suddenly he went quiet and looked behind him. I asked what was the matter, but he shrugged it off. He went to his room and we both tried to sleep. However, like usual on these nights, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. A feeling of dread preventing me from sleeping. I got restless and decided to go to sleep in the room with my boyfriend, hoping I might be able to relax with him there. But still I couldn't sleep. Nearly dozing off only to wake in a fright, which was so uncharacteristic. I gave up and went back to my own room, until I suddenly gave in and fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told my boyfriend that I couldn't sleep all night. I felt like something was coming to get me. He told me at that moment the previous night when he suddenly fell silent mid-conversation, he thought something was outside my window. He said for whatever reason, the first thing that came to his mind was aliens, and it froze him in fear. He also told me that shortly after I had returned to my room in the middle of the night, he was disturbed by a loud static noise and felt vibrations in the air. After a few months, those routine once-a-month sleepless nights stopped and never returned. I still don't know what it was all about, or if it was even anything, but that night put us both on edge.